You don't get to sit there and lie to me, do you hear? I told your mother this was gonna happen! You think you can break the rules and no one will say anything? Not on my watch! Look at me when I'm talking to you!
Ma'am, that's enough. Let's step outside and talk.
Wait, ma'am, let's go. This way.
Wait, Eddie.
You can't just...
It's over. Step toward the front, please.
Everyone's staring.
Keep moving.
Ma'am, I need you to stand up. Let go of me. Easy. We're just gonna step outside, all right? Don't make this harder. Watch your step.
My goodness.
Is she really leaving? I think so. Thank goodness.
The first time I saw her, she was standing too close to my son. Her manicured hand rested on her hip, sunglasses hiding the kind of eyes that judge before they understand. The school bus hadn't even arrived yet, but her voice cut through the morning air like a siren, sharp, entitled, and far too loud for 7:15 a.m. I remember tightening my grip on the coffee mug, watching from across the street, thinking, no one should ever speak to a child that way. My boy was 9 then, still at that age where the world felt safe, where he believed adults were supposed to protect, not intimidate. But she leaned down toward him, lips pursed, saying something I couldn't quite hear, something that made his small shoulders tense. That was the moment everything changed, not because of what she said, but because she thought she could. She didn't know who I was. Not yet. To her, I was just another homeowner in our quiet cul-de-sac, another face she could try to control with her HOA badge and false sense of power. She had no idea the man watching from the driveway had seen far worse than a suburban showdown. She had no idea I carried a badge of my own, one that didn't come from a homeowners meeting, but from years of service, blood, and justice. But in that moment, I didn't move. I wanted to see how far she'd go. There's something about people like her. You give them a little space, and they build themselves a throne. I wanted her to build it high, because I knew, eventually, she'd fall. Our neighborhood wasn't always like this. When we first moved in, it was the kind of place you'd see on a real estate brochure. Clean lawns, kids on bikes, friendly smiles that almost seemed rehearsed. We'd spent months saving up to buy this home, hoping to give our son the stability we'd never had. My wife loved the oak trees that arched over the sidewalks, the way the streetlights glowed warm at dusk. But beneath that perfect surface, something darker pulsed. A quiet arrogance that lived in the rules, the fines, the unspoken hierarchy of the HOA board. At the top of it sat her, Karen Whitaker, HOA president, 3-time Community Volunteer of the Year, according to the newsletter she wrote herself. She ruled the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom, deciding whose hedges were too tall, whose cars were too old, whose children were too loud. At first, we stayed out of it. I worked long hours, rarely home before dark. My wife handled most of the interactions, gentle nods, polite smiles. But Karen didn't like neutrality. She thrived on control, and when someone refused to play her game, she'd find new ways to pull them in. Ours came through something small, a letter. It was folded neatly in our mailbox, typed in the HOA signature font, stamped with that smug little emblem. A house, a tree, and the words Harmony Hills Community. Inside, it claimed our son had been loitering near the bus stop too long after school. Loitering, a 9-year-old. My wife showed me the letter that night, her hands shaking, not from fear, but from disbelief. It's absurd, she whispered, and she was right. But I told her to leave it. Sometimes the best response is silence. Sometimes silence tells people exactly how unimportant their noise is. But silence didn't sit well with Karen. The next morning, she was back, standing at that same corner, arms crossed, waiting for my son again. I remember the light that morning, the kind that made everything look too calm. The way the air smelled like cut grass and gasoline. And then, her voice. "You can't stand there," she said, words clipped, precise, carrying that HOA authority she wore like armor. My son looked confused. He pointed to the bus stop sign beside him, the one every kid used. She didn't care. She moved closer, gesturing with her clipboard, lecturing him about designated waiting zones and community safety. When I stepped out of the house, she turned, startled. but not ashamed. People like her rarely feel shame, only annoyance when someone challenges their illusion of control. I walked slowly toward them, my steps deliberate, the kind I used to take when approaching a suspect who thought he still had the upper hand. She didn't recognize me then. To her, I was just another parent daring to question her authority. "Is there a problem?" I asked. Calm, even, the kind of tone that lets the other person decide whether this becomes a conversation or a confrontation. She smiled, that brittle smile that never reached her eyes. "Your son's been standing on private property," she said. "We've had complaints." Private property. The sidewalk. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, not from anger, but from restraint. My son looked at me, eyes wide, searching for permission to speak, but I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go wait in the car," I told him softly. She seemed pleased by that, like she'd won something, like she'd reminded me of my place. But that was her first mistake, because people like her never realize when they've gone too far, not until the ground beneath them starts to crack. That night, I started to dig. I wanted to know who she really was, beyond the HOA meetings and neighborhood newsletters. I wasn't looking for revenge, at least not then. I just wanted to understand why a grown woman would feel threatened by a child at a bus stop. What I found changed everything. There were records, fines that didn't add up, maintenance fees that mysteriously disappeared, residents who'd sold their homes in frustration, citing unreasonable board practices. Every thread I pulled led to her name, and every receipt, every transfer, every vote had one thing in common: her signature. The HOA wasn't just her hobby. It was her income, her control, her quiet little empire. And now, she'd made it personal. I sat there that night, the screen's glow reflecting off the badge on my desk. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same badge I'd used to protect this city for years now felt like a shield against a war brewing right in my own neighborhood. I told myself I'd give her one last chance. One. But the next morning, she didn't take it. She made sure of that, because by sunrise, my son was crying again on that same corner. And this time, she wasn't just talking, she was recording him. And that's when the line between HOA and handcuffs started to blur. Her phone was out, angled down at him like a weapon wrapped in plastic and privilege. The red light blinked, recording every second of his confusion, his fear, his small voice trying to defend himself against accusations he couldn't even understand. I could see it from across the street, the way her mouth tightened in self-righteous satisfaction, like she was catching a criminal instead of a child waiting for a bus. I didn't run. I walked. Slow. Measured. Years of training buried the instinct to shout, to act. When I reached her, she didn't even lower the phone. Her eyes flicked toward me, a flash of triumph crossing her face, as if she thought she was about to make an example out of me too. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked quietly. My tone didn't change, but something in it must have made her pause, because for the first time, she hesitated. Just a second. Then she recovered, her voice clipped and cold. "Documenting a violation," she said. "A violation," I repeated, watching her thumb hover near the screen. "You're recording a minor, without consent, on a public street." Her jaw set. "This is private HOA property." He was trespassing again. The lie rolled off her tongue like it had practice. I looked past her to the curb, the same one painted by the county, maintained by the city. Not HOA. Not hers. "Turn off the camera," I said, lower now. She didn't move. "Or what?" she snapped. That's when she made her second mistake. She took a step toward my son. I closed the distance between us in an instant, not touching her, not threatening, just stepping into her space, enough for her to feel the shift, the kind of silence that follows before a storm hits. My voice dropped. "Step back." Now. For a heartbeat, the world went still. The wind moved the trees. The bus hummed in the distance. My son's quiet sob hung in the air like an echo of something sacred that she'd just shattered. She took a step back, lips parting like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I took my son's hand and walked away. Not fast, just far enough to make her realize she'd lost that round. But I knew her type. Losing wasn't the end. It was the beginning. That night, she filed a report with the HOA board. According to her version, I had intimidated her, verbally harassed her, and created an unsafe environment for community volunteers. It was all so polished, so professional, I almost admired the craftsmanship. By the next morning, I had an official HOA violation notice taped to my door. Aggressive conduct toward a board member. I laughed when I read it, but my wife didn't. She just stood there, her voice soft. She's not going to stop, is she? I shook my head. No, she's not. I could have ignored it. I could have paid the fine, swallowed the insult, and moved on. But something inside me clicked that day, the same feeling I used to get before a case broke open. The weight of truth sitting just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to dig it up. So I did. I started with the HOA's public filings, the kind most residents never bother to look at. Meeting minutes, expense reports, committee approvals. It was like peeling back wallpaper in an old house. Every layer revealed more rot, overcharged maintenance fees, duplicate payments, a landscaping contract that billed $10,000 a year for a patch of grass smaller than a dining table, and every check signed by the same hand, Karen Whitaker. It wasn't just corruption, it was arrogance. I printed everything, dates, signatures, bank accounts, even a few emails where she approved reimbursements to herself under fake vendor names. I didn't know exactly what my endgame was yet, but I knew this. If she wanted to make my family a target, I was going to make the truth hers. But Karen wasn't the only one watching. The next evening, as I pulled into the driveway, a car I didn't recognize was parked across the street, engine off, windows tinted. It sat there longer than it should have. I could feel the stare, even if I couldn't see it. When I stepped out, the car rolled away, slowly. My instincts went sharp, the same kind of sharp they did on duty when something didn't fit. I checked the corners, the mail, even the house cameras. Nothing unusual. Not yet. Later that night, I got a knock on my door. 2 HOA board members, neighbors who'd once waved politely, now stood with crossed arms and folded papers. They didn't come in, didn't need to. The message was simple. There's been a complaint. You're making people uncomfortable. People, meaning her. I looked at their faces, tight smiles hiding fear. Fear of her. Fear of losing their little piece of suburban peace. That's when I realized how deep her reach went. This wasn't about one woman with a clipboard. It was about a system built on silence. And she'd ruled it for years. But she just picked a fight with the wrong person to silence. Because I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to threaten. I was going to expose. It started with one quiet phone call. Not to the HOA. Not to the city. But to someone I trusted. Someone who still worked inside the department. I didn't tell him much. Just asked for a name check. Karen Whitaker, I said. Homeowners Association President. Harmony Hills. There was a pause. Then a low whistle. You sure you want to go down that road? Already halfway there, I said. He sighed. All right. Give me a few days. I hung up and looked out the window. The streetlights flickered against the stillness of the neighborhood. Somewhere out there, she was probably sitting at her dining table, writing another letter, planning another fine, another lie. But this time, her story was about to collide with mine, and she wouldn't like the ending. 3 days later, I got the call. It came early, before dawn, when the house was still quiet and the world felt half asleep. My contact's voice was low, almost cautious. You didn't hear this from me, he said, but your HOA president. She's been flagged before. I sat up, every nerve alert. Flagged for what? He hesitated. Fraud investigation. Small-time stuff. Nothing that went to court. Looks like she settled privately, maybe 5, 6 years ago. HOA funds. Same setup, different community. My mind sharpened like glass under pressure. She'd done this before. Moved from one neighborhood to another. Changed HOAs like people change jobs. rebuilding her little empire each time until someone caught on. But this time, she'd made it personal. After the call ended, I sat there for a long while, just listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the house as it settled. It was a strange kind of calm, the one that comes right before a storm you know you're not going to avoid. I spent that morning gathering everything, every printout, every letter, every recorded HOA meeting I could find online. I had enough to draw a pattern, a story that didn't just prove misconduct, it proved intent. But stories like these need witnesses. And in neighborhoods like ours, witnesses prefer whispers. So I started walking, not to confront, not to threaten, just to talk. I caught people on their porches, near the mailbox, at the park. Some avoided eye contact. Others let it slip with a quiet sigh. Yeah, one man finally admitted she fined us for parking in front of our own house. Said it was a safety violation. My wife cried for days. Another neighbor confessed that Karen had lost their landscaping payments twice, then fined them for non-payment. It was the same pattern, over and over. Fear disguised as compliance. By sunset, I had half a dozen quiet voices confirming what I already knew. She'd turned community rules into currency, kindness into control. That night, I sat on the porch with my wife. The air was cool, the cicadas humming like a heartbeat in the distance. She looked at me, worry soft in her eyes. What are you going to do with it? I watched the streetlights flicker on, one by one. I'm going to let her bury herself, I said. The next morning, I attended the HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a space that smelled faintly of old coffee and cheap carpet cleaner. Karen sat at the head of the table, posture perfect, smile fixed like porcelain. When I walked in, her eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to being challenged. Not by me. Not by anyone. The room was packed tighter than usual. Maybe word had spread. Maybe people were finally ready to see. She started the meeting with her usual rehearsed warmth, thanking volunteers, reading through agenda items with a tone that dripped with authority. But beneath the surface, tension hung heavy. Every word, every glance felt measured. When she got to community behavior concerns, she looked up, straight at me. We've had several incidents involving one homeowner, she began, her voice sweet as poison. Aggressive conduct, non-compliance. We believe it's creating a safety risk. Eyes turned toward me. I didn't speak. I just waited. Then she made her third mistake. She tried to embarrass me publicly. As HOA president, she continued, I have a duty to maintain harmony. I'm recommending a motion to suspend certain community privileges until behavior improves. That was her moment of triumph, or so she thought. I stood slowly, every eye following. My voice stayed even. Before you vote, I'd like to submit something for the record. I walked forward and set a folder on the table. Thin, clean, but heavy in weight. These are financial discrepancies from the past year. Payments marked as completed but never deposited. Vendor contracts with matching account numbers. I think the board should review them before making any decisions about behavior. The room went still. You could feel the shift, like air before lightning. Karen's smile froze, the color draining from her face. That information is confidential, she snapped. Not anymore, I said softly. Public records. I just connected the dots. The murmurs started then, soft at first, then rising like a slow tide. Board members flipped through papers, eyes widening. One of them, a man named George, cleared his throat. Karen, these vendor accounts, they're in your name. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I watched her try to gather herself, to spin control back into her voice. This is a misunderstanding, she said finally. He's twisting data. But she never finished the sentence, because just then, 2 uniformed officers walked in. The timing was perfect. Too perfect. They were there on a separate matter, at least officially. Routine financial inquiry triggered by a complaint, mine, filed quietly 3 days ago with full documentation attached. They didn't arrest her then. Not yet. They just asked for a few documents. Asked her to step outside for clarification. Her face was pale as they let her out. clipboard still in her trembling hands. The room stayed silent. You could hear the faint sound of her heels on the tile, echoing like the last act of a play no one wanted to admit was ending. When the door closed behind her, George looked at me. "You knew this would happen," he said quietly. I nodded. "No one's above the rules," I answered. For the first time since I'd moved there, the room felt lighter. People exhaled. Someone whispered. Finally. I didn't stay for the rest of the meeting. I didn't need to. Justice doesn't always need applause. It just needs to land where it belongs. But the story wasn't over. Not yet. Because Karen wasn't the kind to surrender quietly. And the next time I saw her, she wasn't holding a clipboard. She was in handcuffs. It happened a week later. A gray morning that smelled like rain and endings. I was driving back from the precinct, halfway lost in thought, when I saw the flashing lights ahead. 2 patrol cars parked near the entrance of our subdivision, red and blue reflections bleeding across the wet pavement. For a second, I thought it was another traffic stop, routine, forgettable. But then I saw her. Karen, standing on the curb in her pearl earrings and perfectly pressed blazer, wrists cuffed behind her back. Her hair, usually so immaculate, clung to her face in damp strands. The officers she'd once called to harass neighbors were now guiding her toward the back of a patrol car. It was a strange kind of symmetry, quiet, poetic, almost cruel. I pulled over, not to gloat, not to interfere, just to watch. She saw me from across the street, and in that single glance, something shifted. The arrogance was gone. What replaced it wasn't fear. It was disbelief, as if the world she'd built, the little empire of rules and fines and authority, had betrayed her. She tried to say something, but the rain drowned it out. Or maybe it wasn't rain at all. Maybe it was the sound of her own control slipping away. The officer guiding her was young, polite, doing his job with quiet professionalism. I recognized the look on his face. I'd worn it myself 100 times. The mix of duty and discomfort that comes from arresting someone who never thought they could be touched by the law. When the car door closed, she turned her head toward me one last time. And even through the fogged glass, I could see it. The realization that she'd finally met someone who didn't play by her rules. They drove away slowly, taillights disappearing into the mist. For a long time, I just stood there, the sound of rain filling the silence she used to occupy. The neighborhood was different after that. Quieter, lighter, like the air itself had exhaled. For weeks, people avoided talking about it directly. They spoke in careful fragments. "Did you hear?" Or, "I guess it finally caught up to her." The HOA meetings continued, but the tone changed. Decisions were made with transparency. Votes were recorded properly. And no one used fear as leverage anymore. Still, her shadow lingered. Not as a threat, but as a lesson. One afternoon, as I was trimming the hedges, George stopped by. He was carrying a box filled with files, old HOA paperwork. "We thought you should see this," he said. Turns out she'd been double billing almost every vendor for years. Some accounts even went to a P.O. box she registered in another county. I nodded, not surprised. "How much?" "Close to $80,000, he said quietly. "Maybe more. $80,000 stolen from people who just wanted peace. Lawns mowed, sidewalks clean, kids safe. All of it twisted into profit and control." I thanked him, took the box, and set it down in the garage. I didn't need to look through it. I already knew what it would say. Later that week, a letter arrived from the county prosecutor's office. Formal, precise. Karen Whitaker had been officially charged with embezzlement, forgery, and harassment. They attached a copy of my statement, the same one I'd written late at night, after tucking my son into bed. Reading it again, I realized it wasn't just a report. It was a confession of faith, in truth, in patience, in the kind of justice that doesn't shout, but waits. The news spread slowly, as news in quiet suburbs often does. Some pitied her, others celebrated. Me, I just felt done. Not happy, not vindicated, just done. A few evenings later, my son sat beside me on the porch, legs swinging, watching the school bus pull away. "She's not coming back, right?" he asked softly. I looked at him, at the small scar of fear she'd left behind, and shook my head. No, I said. She's not coming back. He nodded, satisfied with that small piece of peace, and went back to drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. For the first time in months, the corner by the bus stop looked ordinary again. No watchful eyes, no clipboard, just morning light, the smell of dew, and children laughing. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. Weeks later, I received a final envelope from the HOA, a formal apology signed by every board member. They refunded the fines, restored the privileges, even offered to name me as a community liaison. I declined. I didn't want another title. I'd already worn one for too long. Instead, I asked for something simple. A bench. I had it installed near the bus stop. Nothing fancy, just wood and metal, with a small plaque that read, "For those who wait and for those who watch." It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what happens when good people stay silent too long, about the quiet courage it takes to speak, even when no one listens. Every morning, I watch from my porch as my son waits there, his backpack slung over one shoulder, sunlight on his face. The world feels lighter now. Honest. Real. And sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I hear the faint echo of her voice in my mind, commanding, cold, certain. But it fades quickly, carried away by the same wind that brought her downfall. People like her think control is power. They never realize the real power comes from knowing when to let go. She thought she could intimidate my child. She didn't know she was teaching him what justice looks like. And in the end, that was her biggest mistake.